So you might have seen that I have actually re-uploaded this video. I've labeled this as version 2 this time for the RTX 4070 buying guide at launch edition. That's because the MSI Ventus 3X is now no longer one of my recommended cards. It's actually freaking horrible. And if you bought one, I'm sorry, you should return it. If you accidentally already bought one because of my video, I'm really sorry, but I think you really should cancel the order as fast as you can or return it. Because there's this comment on the video. Can you read that? What do you think of the Ventus 3X 97 degrees hotspot around the VRM from Guru 3D testing? I was like, wait a second, what? How can a card with this low power reach 97 degrees on the VRMs? So I opened Guru 3D's review, and since they have the FLIR recordings, which usually isn't that important and not that useful because most of the cards are covered up, but sure enough, you can see it reached 96.5 degrees Celsius at the top of the PCB. Well, they said that the upper portion is that a section of the VRM is not adequately cooled. It's not making contact with the area. It's not like it's gonna blow up because most VRMs can handle like 125 degrees Celsius or even 150. And if you check out the spec sheet on the MOSFETs themselves, you can see that the MOSFET, the NCP 2150 here. Where is the PDF? This PDF, yes. You can see the MOSFETs itself can actually handle about 150 degrees at maximum. So 97 won't kill it, but that's not great when other cards VRMs basically don't even cross 60 or 70 degrees, and it's, you know, the cooler running a component is, the longer it'll last. And so I looked at it and they said it didn't make contact with the heatsink, and I was like, let's see. So here you can see the PCB itself on the MSI Ventus, and you can see there's some VRM components at the top of the card over here. One of them is for the GPU VRM, so it shares the same load as the other VRM phases on the left near the DisplayPort outputs over here, and also a memory phase on top and on the right down here. And if you look at the heatsink here, there isn't actually anything that contacts the VRMs. It's literally just floating in thin air. There's a single like black thermal pad looking thing near the screws, but that really is not for the VRMs because you can see there that's right beside the screws and right beside the empty memory pads, which there isn't memory soldered onto here because this is only a 12 gig model with a less memory bus width, and this shares PCB with the higher end cards, or at least is theoretically pin compatible. But anyways, there's no thermal pads that's contacting the VRMs at the top of the PCB to the heatsink, which is really bizarre because if you look at the other cards, even the crappiest card design, the Gainward Ghost and Palette Dual, it does have thermal pads at the top contacting the VRMs. Because if you have VRMs on the top and on the bottom here on the sides, you still need to cool them. They still get quite warm, so you still have thermal pads over there. Now looking at other cards, for example like the PNY, it also still has thermal pads for the VRMs on the bottom here and also on the top for the two VRM phases. And this one has a similar PCB design as the MSI too, with the separate VRMs at the top, two of them. But the MSI just doesn't have it. And this was really weird. This is such a design fail to me because you can clearly see the VRM face at the top being exposed. It's literally not contacting anything. It's not being cooled. It's just by pure airflow or something. MSI is just hoping the airflow from the fans is enough to keep it cool because there really isn't anything cooling the VRMs, and that makes it really concerning because the backplate is plastic, so you can't even put a thermal pad on the back of the PCB to cool it to the backplate because it's plastic. And it turns out the heatsink is not cooling the VRM. I just noticed this because of the comment that mentioned it. I didn't notice it at first, but yes, now that I've seen this, you definitely should not get the MSI RTX 4070 Ventus, and you should return it or cancel your order if you bought this because of my video. I'm really sorry. So with that said, the rest of the video is going to be the video before. showing the cards and rambling about it, but when you get to the conclusion, this is going to be a different one this time. So the RTX 4070 has just been launched a few days ago, and I know that a lot of people have been asking me to do the buying guide for the RTX 4070. Unfortunately, this early on, it's really not possible because there's not enough reviews anywhere for me to conclude like with enough models this early on. Plus, it takes time for me to compile the data and then compare it definitively for a buying guide. But I thought I should do a quick at launch which RTX 4070 to buy video, because I know lots of people are trying to get it and they have no idea which one to get it and which one's good. But it seems to me like Tech Power Up has absolutely went to town with the RTX 4070 reviews, and there's a good amount of information for especially the cards that they have already reviewed here, which is plenty. There's like 10 of them that they've reviewed, including the Founders Edition, which is pretty good. It's just missing the Gigabyte cards, which, you know, you can see in Kit Guru's reviews. So let's check them out, I guess also OC3D, and see which one's actually a decent card to buy, at least for a really quick, like skimming over the reviews type of buying guide. Not quite as in-depth as I usually go. But I guess you can also use this video to see how I actually judge the cards when I do my buying guide. And I might do more of this in the future as well if everyone likes this type of video. But yeah, let's get to it. So now the RTX 4070 is based on the same GPU core as the RTX 4070 Ti. Yes, the card that Nvidia tried to sell as an RTX 4080 12GB. And this time they actually do have a Founders Edition card, as you can see here. Now, I actually kind of have a theory on why they did not have a 4070 Ti Founders Edition, but they did have a 4070 Founders Edition. Nvidia definitely did not plan on not making a 4070 Ti Founders Edition card. They definitely wanted to sell a Founders Edition 4070 Ti, but they just only made a 4080 Founders Edition card. And they had to scrap it all because, you know what? This card has the 4070 writing embossed or machined into the backplate of the card. And I'm pretty sure that's the same case for the 4070 Ti, which was previously supposed to be launched as a 4080 12GB. So I'm pretty sure those 4070 Ti Founders Edition cards actually just has a 4080 etched into the backplate of it. And they couldn't just use a 4070 cooler, which is much smaller this time on the 4070 Ti, because the 4070 Ti has a much higher TDP. So they just had to scrap the 4070 Ti Founders Edition launch because, well, it was a 4080 and they couldn't, you know, put out a 4080 card when it's now called a 4070 Ti, so they just didn't make a Founders Edition card for the 4070 Ti. But now that we have the 4070 Founders Edition, I think it's quite interesting that they made this card actually now match the aesthetics and as well as the fan layout as the bigger 4080 and 4090, instead of what they did in the 3070 in the previous generation, where the 3070 has a more conventional dual fan in the front layout instead of this flow-through design even all the way down to the 4070. So I think this is quite interesting that they put the flow-through design down to the smaller cards now. And it's great that they made it much smaller than a 4080 and a 4090, because honestly the huge coolers are pretty unnecessary on the 40 series cards. It could really be more useful in the 30 series cards, to be honest, because the 40 series run much cooler than 30 series cards. But as you can see now, the 4070 now has a full flow-through card, and it's the same size as the 3070 and 3060 Ti of the previous generation. But yeah, aside from that, this card is pretty small, dual slot, and is a good option if you just want a small card for an SFF build or something like that. It'll perform like a 4070, obviously. It's the, you know, the reference 4070, so any 4070 should perform within a few percent of the 4070 Founders Edition, because overclocks and the power limit increases from the factory these days don't really add that much, maybe like below 3% at most between the slowest and the fastest cards. And you're also still going to be limited by your silicon lottery if you're getting a good chip or not, because the boost is determined by that. But anyways, if you look at the Founders Edition card, you can see that the PCB is very small. This time around, Nvidia uses a 6-phase VRM, and it's using 50 amp power stages on NCP2150 DRMOS. And yeah, this is a pretty basic VRM compared to the higher end cards like the 4080, 4090, but it really doesn't need it because the TDP is only 200 watts. And well, if you calculate 50 times 6, that's already 300 amps, and you consider that this card runs at 1.1 volts as far as I remember. Let's see here. Yes, it runs at 1.1 volts when it's at the maximum voltage. You know, you can just calculate 300 watts divided by 1.1. That's 272. Wait, actually, not divided. 300 times 1.1 volts. That's 330 watts of maximum power output from the VRM. And the 4070 chip will never touch that, especially not if you don't modify the power limits by shorting the shunts or something like that. But yeah, anyways, so this card, the 4070, is based on the same chip as the 4070 Ti. It just has way less cores. If you look at the specifications over here, you can see that the 4070 has 5888 CUDA cores versus the 4070 Ti's 7680 CUDA cores. So it's quite a lot cut down because, well, I don't know, product segmentation, but this is honestly more than I was expecting for a card that is on the same naming scheme, on the same name. But I guess that's because Nvidia was supposed to name this again 4080, but they, because of the backlash, they named it 4070 Ti. So now it looks a much bigger difference to the 4070 than you're used to between a Ti and a non-Ti card. But anyways, looking at the cards itself now, you can see this is a small cooler on the Founders Edition, but let's take a look at the other cards as well. Now, the coolers are all much larger on the aftermarket cards, but I'm also interested in the VRMs. But let's take a look at the cooler first. The Gainward has their Ghost cards, which are dual fan coolers and are also dual slot. So this is a good alternative if you're looking for a compact card for an SFF build instead of just the Founders Edition card. And this is also the same as the Palette card, but not the Jetstream. Palette and Gainward are basically the same company, just like rebranded. So the dual OC from Palette is essentially the same thing as the Gainward card. It's essentially the same exact card. It should be similar to the Founders Edition. It is quite a small cooler. You can see it only has 4 heat pipes, and it's quite thin, and it's lighter in the Founders card, but this is because it's also using lots of plastic. Now for the MSI card, you have the Ventus 3X. This has a 6-phase VRM, again, the same. And this has same 50 amp power phases for the VRM. And in reference to the Founders Edition card, this is basically the same thing. So these may look weak, but it's really much more than enough. And it's nice to see that even on the base model cards from the different companies, they're using the same VRM layouts as Nvidia did on the Founders Edition. So the VRMs are, again, not really a worry on the 40 series, which is a good thing, but also makes it less exciting because everything will work just fine. But well, the MSI Ventus has a larger cooler that's triple slot. I meant triple fan, but still a dual slot card, which is great if you, again, need a thin card for an SFF PC build. But this is triple fan, so this will definitely perform better than the dual fan reference and Gainward and Palette cards. Now, if you look at the Asus card, again, you get a dual fan card, the Asus Dual, while their Tough card is a triple fan card. But this time Asus did make it thicker, so it's like 2.5 slots card basically, and it'll obviously not fit in a case that needs a 2-slot card. But if you can fit taller than 2 slots in terms of GPU size, this is a good option because it'll perform better. I'll compare the cooling performance from Tech Power Up's review later on, but for now let's just take a look at the design first. This has a much bigger heatsink, as you can see, and it also has more heat pipes than the cheaper cards. This does have the same only dual fan though, so I'm guessing this will lose compared to the triple fan cards. But let's say the VRMs, you can see that Asus is using a stronger VRM this time. It's using an 8-phase VRM, And you might think that looks weird, that looks like it should be the memory on this side, but it's not. You can actually tell if you open the front and the back side photos from Tech Power Up, that's high res, you can see that it is separated, it's segmented. This side, as you can see the traces here, this is for the memory, and the top side here is connected to the core, just like these VRMs over on the left side. So the VRMs here, it is actually an 8-phase VRM, and it is 8 by 50 amps still. But that's a significant amount more. That's 100 amps more than the base VRMs. So this is a good option if you want to short the shunts, which by the way are near the power connectors, and you can just run it unlimited power and it should not explode. It'll handle it just fine. Now let's take a look at the tough card. It's a triple fan design obviously, but this time it's much thicker. It's now fully 3 slots at least, and it also has obviously because of that a much heavier weight, so that might be a consideration if you want a lighter PC. But this will definitely not fit in the smaller SFF cases, but it does give you much better cooling performance because look at the amount of heat pipes it has, and the heatsink is much larger. Not to mention more airflow from the extra fans. And you can see that the PCB is essentially the same as the dual card. It just has more VRM phases populated. As you can see, this is more featured. Well, in terms of basically just a few more capacitors and 1 extra phase. I meant two extra phases actually. Yes, so this is a 10-phase VRM with 50 amp power stages still, but that's already 50 by 10 500. That's already ridiculously powerful for an RTX 4070, as you'll see the power consumption later. Now we'll take a look at the PNY card. This is again, I think PNY should be the same as the Gainward card, essentially similar design at least. They might be the same OEM because it really looks like they use a similar cooler design, even though, well, this one has more heat pipes than a PNY, but I don't know, maybe they stopped working together completely with pellet. But yeah, it's another dual slot card and dual fan. It's one of the smallest ones here, and it's definitely one of the lighter ones, one of the lightest. And this card in particular only has triple heat pipes, so this really is probably the weakest RTX 4070 cooler out of all the PNY dual card. Yeah, it's not really anything impressive. I wouldn't get it unless you just want a cheap one. The only thing that's actually impressive is the VRMs, because they actually use an 8-phase here, which is really surprising to me because usually PNY does base model stuff. But they did actually use an 8-phase, and yes, this is the GPU VRM over here as well. You can put another one here and also another one on the bottom if you like to, as a manufacturer I guess. But yeah, this is a reference PCB, and they decided to populate 1 extra VRM at the top and also filled it out all the way to 8 phases by 50 amps. So this is on par with the Asus dual card in terms of VRM, but yeah, the heatsink is a lot weaker, but might be good if you want to swap the heatsink. Now on the MSI Gaming X card, as you can see here, this is a triple fan, triple slot card again. Well, not quite triple slot, maybe it's like 2.5, but it is basically 3 slots, I think. It's not, doesn't look as thick as a tough card though. But yeah, this is a really huge card again, not going to fit in SFF PC, but this might have one of the best coolers ever for the 4070, because as you can see, there's a crap ton of heat pipes that MSI has put into the heatsink, and it's also a really huge heatsink with a lot of fans that will blow a lot of air into it. So this will be a very good choice if you want the best cooling possible and the quietest card for the 4070. The MSI is probably one of the best ones. And well, you can see here, they also have a 9-phase VRM, so almost as good as the tough, but again, like I said, it does look like they use stronger MOSFETs, power stages, so it's 55 amps. It's actually stronger than the tough then. 9 times 55 is 495. Well, maybe not quite stronger, but just as strong as the tough. My math is kind of off. So yeah, it's a 9-phase VRM by 55 amps, and they do seem to populate basically all the soldering spots for the capacitors. So yeah, this should be a very good VRM as well. you can shot mod it and it will not explode, just like the Asus cards, powerful VRMs as well. And the heatsink can cope with the heat as well, even though again this card doesn't pull a lot of power, so the heatsink will be extremely overkill on the MSI and the tough cards so far. So now let's see the Pellet Jetstream card. I actually really like that they bring back the Jetstream branding, because remember I had a 2060 Super, branding, Jetstream 2060 Super Jetstream from Pellet before for review, and this thing is a pretty good card. Massive heatsink, overkill again. So I'm hoping this one will be also the same case with a massively overkill heatsink. So let's take a look. Triple fans, triple slot, but it's not as tall as the MSI card or the Asus card, as you can see here. It doesn't protrude above the PCIe slot as much. Now for the Pellet card, you can see that it has a lot more heat pipes than their base dual fan card as well. And yeah, it looks like a pretty good heatsink and has a decent amount of heft to it, 1455 grams. And looking at the VRMs, it's the only weird part over here because, well, this is using the base VRM, which is pretty disappointing to be honest, because the Jetstream card, the 2060 that I used to use, that I got for review from Pellet before, this has a really strong VRM for 2060 Super, and Pellet just seems to not put strong VRMs anymore on their card. Because if you've seen my 4090 Game Rock review as well, the VRM is also kind of mediocre, and it's pretty much the same case here. Although with the 40 series, again, it's not too big of a deal. It's just that it's kind of annoying when you're spending a card that's supposed to be more premium and you don't get the premium VRM. Like, why don't they just populate it? It shouldn't even cost that much. They really should have made the VRM stronger, even just because, if it's even not necessary, but just because it really doesn't feel good to buy a card with a base level VRM when you're spending more as one of their premium cards. But yeah, it's 6 phase by 50 amp, just like the reference card, and the other base model card like the Gainward, which is the same as the Pellet, same PCB. I can prove it to you, they use the same exact PCB, because Pellet and Gainward are the same companies. Now for the Galaxy card, it's a triple fan card again, now with one extra giant fan in the middle. It's also just over 2 slots, like 2.5 slots, but basically, yes, it blocks your third slot just like the other cards. And it also has a pretty decent heatsink, although weirdly enough it doesn't have that many heat pipes. It looks like it only has 3 heat pipes, and yeah, I don't know, it's kind of weird for such a large heatsink. The VRMs are pretty good though. It's an 8-phase VRM with 55 amps of power stages, so this is pretty powerful. Again, 8 times 55, 440 amps. This is more than the Asus dual card, and plenty of power to, mod the card and overclock the crap out of it. And this is also backed by the fact that it has measurement points for voltages, which is pretty cool for a Hall of Fame card from Galaxy. It looks like some extreme overclocking features that they put on the card, which is not super necessary, but it's pretty cool to have, even though if you don't use it. And now I'm wondering if the Asus also has soldering points for the... Yes, Asus also has soldering points for voltage measurement, just as usual, which is awesome because it's the same PCB as their dual card, their cheapest one. So I guess if you want to overclock and tinker with your card, the Asus and the Galaxy card is one of the best options, because I don't think MSI has that. Yes, MSI does not have voltage measurement points. Yeah, but they do have the VRM's voltage controller soldering points over here near the controller. I think that's the controller. Yes, is it? Actually, I'm not 100% sure on that. Let me see. That's not the voltage controller for that. That is weird. Why did they put it there? Why didn't they put it near the VRM for the GPU core? What the heck? What is that for? I have no idea. But Asus does have also the communication soldering points, this PGS Con 1 connector at the top left of the card here, which you can solder on leads onto to connect to an external controller like the Elmore EVCS2X, so that you can overvolt the card using external voltage controller. Well, you're still using a voltage controller, but you're controlling the voltage controller externally. So yeah, if you want to modify your card, the Galax and the Asus card seems like a good option. And now the PNY card, you also get the triple fan card from PNY, but this time it's a dual slot, which I actually really like. So this card with the RGB, their Accelerate RTX 4070, is a dual slot triple fan card, which is not very heavy, admittedly, but it's a triple fan card, so there's more airflow, which means you can run it slower. And interestingly, it also uses a single 8-pin connector, which I just noticed, which no one, but yeah, MSI also is using that, and Gainward as well as PNY. I just noticed that everyone is using an 8-pin power connector except for the Gaming X Trio. Wow, yeah, so the only cards with the new 12VH power connector is the MSI Gaming X Trio and the reference NVIDIA card. Everyone else is just using an 8-pin power connector, which is awesome because the 12VH power connector is pretty stupid. I still hate it. It's flimsy and there's no point in using that because you could pull the same amount of power from the 8-pin regular PCIe connector as long as your power supply is not a piece of crap. So there's no point for the 12VH power except for making a new standard just to make sure that power supplies that are made with that connector now complies with high quality, because there are crappy power supplies that has an 8-pin that cannot supply 300 watts through the 8-pin, but there are high quality power supplies that could supply like 400, 500 watts through the 8-pin, no problem. So yeah, but I love that most of them use an 8-pin now, because this is a much better connector in my opinion. It's much more durable and less problematic. So again, yeah, this is a dual slot card with triple fans, but this time it has 4 heat pipes, unlike the Galax card, although the Galax does have larger heat pipes. Now for the VRAMs on the PCB, wow, okay, PNY uses an 8-phase in here as well, just like their smaller card. That's pretty awesome that PNY has a much better, well, not much better, well, I guess it is significantly better, but not too useful, but it's still a better VRM than the reference base level 6-phase VRM because they're using an 8-phase design, so that's pretty nice. You can shot mod this and overclock to your heart's content. Now, I think we should look at the comparison, so I'll just pick the newest review that they have. Oh, I almost forgot. I gotta show the Gigabyte card. Gigabyte has a triple fan card. I think this is their WindForce OC, yes. It's a triple fan card, which has honestly a design that I don't really like. That looks kind of weird and cheap. And it has a triple slot thickness as well. So that's a thing. We don't really get shots of the PCB there. So let's take a look at Kit Guru, see if they have PCB shots. Yes, they do. Okay, the Gigabyte WindForce OC has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 phase VRM. Although I think they did say 7 phases, but it's because they miscounted it. This VRM phase at the top near the memory, the missing memory chips, that's a GPU VRM phase, so it's an actually 8 phase just like the other cards. So that's pretty good. Gigabyte has an 8 phase VRM, and in terms of the cooler, it's a triple fan card, but it only has 3 heat pipes and it uses that annoying direct contact heat pipe thing, which I really don't like on GPUs because it is not too good with contact, and thankfully no one else is using it. I think not even MSI is using direct contact. Yes, that's great. Yes, MSI's Ventus doesn't even have direct contact heat pipes. It's not a performance improving thing. It's a cost-cutting measure when they use direct contact heat pipes, and I'm just looking at it again now to make sure no one uses it. Yes, absolutely no one uses it, which is freaking fantastic because that sucks ass, and Gigabyte should be ashamed of putting direct contact heat pipes, because I have been praising their heat sinks for the 4070 Ti and the 4080 and as well as the 4090, but This time they seem to have dropped the ball because this is the crappiest heatsink I've seen for the 4070. Only 3 heat pipes, a small heatsink. It does have 3 fans, but a small heatsink and a direct contact heat pipe setup, which will suck in terms of consistency between different cards being manufactured in terms of cooling performance, because you can never get the heat pipes completely flat, and there's gaps between it, which sucks for a GPU because GPUs don't have a heat spreader, so there's going to be hot spots in between the gaps. So if you look at the temperatures now compared to the other cards, let's take a look at Tech Power-Up's review as well. Now you can see the temperatures here. Usually how I compare is look at cards with similar noise levels. So for example, you get a Asus Dual over here, which is 31, let me just zoom in a little bit, 31.2 decibels. And then you'll find another card that's similar, okay, 32 for the NVIDIA FE. And you can see the Asus is running at 61 versus 69 for the FE, or 32 on the PNY dual fan card, and it's 69 versus 61. So definitely the Asus Dual is better than those as a dual fan card because it's a much thicker card. Also, when they run it in the quiet BIOS at 25 decibels, well, it's only 67 degrees, which if you compare to, let's see, 25 decibels on the Gaming X, it's 62 degrees on the Gaming X. So now that means the MSI Gaming X is better than the Asus Dual, which makes sense. It's a much larger cooler with triple fans. But if you compare now the Gaming X to the TUF, and you can see here, the TUF has 59 degrees at 27 decibels versus 62 at 25. But well, you can compare 61 degrees on the TUF versus 62 degrees on the Gaming X, but the TUF is much quieter. So I would say the TUF Gaming from Asus has a better cooler than the MSI, or about similar maybe. It does have worse memory temperature, so I'm leaning towards the Gaming X being a better cooler than the TUF. I might get that over the TUF if I'm looking for the best cooler, to be honest. It does look like it's better overall. But the TUF does have a performance mode that keeps it below 60 degrees. So if you want the coolest temperature possible with the highest boost, with overclocking, with shunt mods, then the TUF is definitely the best 4070 so far that I've seen, because it has a voltage measuring points and as well as a solderable connecting point for the voltage controller interface, so you can control the voltage manually if you want to do extreme overclocking on the 4070 TUF. Now the Galaxy EX, 62 degrees, but it's at 34.8 decibels. This is not great. This is actually that's pretty bad. That's a triple fan card that's performing like a dual fan card. Almost. Well, not quite, but 62. Yes, you can see, well, compared to the Gaming X, 62 degrees at 26 decibels, 35 decibels at 62 degrees is really terrible. And the Ventus 3X at 64 degrees is only 28 decibels, which is much quieter than 35. Because again, decibel is logarithmic, so 35 should be much louder than 28 decibels. So even the Ventus 3X, which is only a dual slot card compared to the triple slot Galaxy EX card, the Ventus is a better cooler. And well, the VRMs don't matter too much, so I would get the Ventus over the EX. So I'm really liking how MSI is stepping up the Ventus line to be a more better quality card than they used to be. But I would say the Galaxy EX at least beats the FE, because the FE is at 69 degrees at 32.5 or almost 33 decibels. So the FE is definitely the worst cooler. But if you compare it to the PNY dual fan card here, let's see, the FE is basically the same as the PNY 4070 over here in terms of cooling performance. Same temperature and basically the same noise level. The Pellet Jetstream triple fan card, on the other hand, does run the coolest out of everything, which is really impressive to me. It is only 29 decibels as well, which is pretty quiet, and 58 degrees over here at 29 decibels. This is just a smidge worse than the results on the Asus TUF. This is 59 degrees on the Asus TUF versus 58, which is actually cooler on the Pellet Jetstream. but it is a bit noisier, 3 decibels. Actually, only 2 decibels noisier than the Asus TUF, just 27 decibels. So I would say the Asus TUF has a similar cooling performance to the Palette Jetstream, which is really impressive on the Palette Jetstream. I really like their coolers being overkill, but the Asus TUF does have a much better VRM implementation. So the Asus TUF is still the best card here for now, I would say. As well as the MSI Gaming X if you don't care about the VRM too much. The dual fan PNY 4070 and the MSI and the NVIDIA FE is basically the same thing, similar VRM setup. And the Gainward Ghost is for some reason performing the worst out of everything. I really thought they would be the same as the PNY, or at least closer, but I guess it's not because it does have less heat pipes, and you can really tell here it's 36 decibels, which is the loudest card, the loudest RTX 4070, and it is also the hottest RTX 4070. Now the PNY Accelerate card, again it's a triple fan card, dual slot. It performs really good, 67 degrees at only 24 decibels though. So if you compare this to the Asus TUF here, 23 and 24 is pretty close. The Asus TUF is 61 degrees, this is 67, so it's a bit worse than the TUF. But if you consider that it's a dual slot card, that's a pretty good result. I wouldn't say it's as good as the TUF for sure, because it's thinner, but I think the MSI Ventus 3X and the PNY Accelerate triple fan dual slot card are pretty similar because the Ventus does run 3 degrees cooler, but it is 4 decibels noisier, versus the PNY being 3 degrees warmer but run much quieter. And you know, being these are all below 70 degrees except for the crappy Ghost card. And you know, with that also means the Palette Dual card is also a piece of crap as well. Everything else runs below 60 degrees, which is not a problem. So picking the quietest card is actually a good option. And it's kind of interesting how the PNY Accelerate is the second quietest card compared to the Asus TUF, which is a much thicker cooler. So that's a really impressive showing again from PNY in terms of their cooler design. And now their VRMs is not base level, so this is really one of the better cards. So considering seeing the different VRMs, coolers, and the different designs, and also seeing how it performs compared to the Gigabyte card over here, which is just slightly better than the NVIDIA FE, as you can see here. GPU temperatures at 76 degrees versus 78 in the FE in KitGuru's testing. And you can see in acoustics, the Palette Dual is, yeah, of course, just like in Tech Power-Ups, Gainward Ghost, which is the same card as the Dual. It's worse than the FE. It's definitely the worst 4070, the Palette Dual and the Gainward Ghost. But the Gigabyte WindForce OC has the same noise level as the FE, but only slightly cooler temperatures despite being a triple slot, triple fan card. So this is probably in a similar range to being a crappy triple fan card as the Galaxy EX White. So the conclusion for how the RTX 4070 models stack up this time, I would say, will be the Asus TUF at the top, because it has the best cooler. Yes, it is the best VRM as well. So it has the best cooler, the largest heatsink, and the most powerful, and the best VRMs as well. And considering it also has voltage controller points for soldering stuff onto so you can mess with the voltage on the card, it's probably the best one for extreme overclocking as well. And then you'll have the MSI Gaming X Trio, which actually has the highest power limit out of the box at up to 240 watts, and also has a cooler that's basically just almost as good as the TUF, but has a VRM that's a little bit weaker, but basically the same. It just does not have voltage controller points. So if you do not care about doing extreme overclocking, soldering your own voltage controller, the MSI Gaming X Trio is also a really good card there, especially with the higher power limits out of the box. Then I would put the PNY Accelerate as a third card, simply because as a 2-slot card, this makes the most sense for the 4070 because it's not extremely thick for no reason at all. But sure, the performance kind of suffers because it's thinner, but for a 2-slot card, it's really impressively quiet. It's the quietest card out of the bunch, and I really like that they tuned it that way because you really don't need it to run that cold, you know, like the Asus running below 60 degrees. And this will still give you all of the performance because it still runs really cold and it's also extremely quiet. And it's thin, so it's really just the whole package here. Especially you also get a really decent VRM with the PNY card this time as well. It's basically the same as the Asus Dual with 8 phases. And also like the MSI as well. With, well, this one has one more phase, but well, close enough. It's a really good card overall anyways. So the Pellet Jetstream will be the fourth card here, I would say, because while it does have a better cooler than the PNY, and because it's thicker and larger, it does perform a bit better, and you can tune it to be quieter if you want to at the same temperature as the PNY, simply because it's a better performing cooler. The PCB is really lacking. It's just a base level 6-phase VRM, which is not impressive for a card that's supposed to be one of their higher end models. Yeah, they should have really just populated more phases here so that it can compete. And yeah, the power limit is not as high as the MSI, so it can't be higher than this in terms of the tiers. And the Asus Dual would be next. I would put it under the Jetstream from Palette, just simply because it's only a dual fan card. But if you're looking for a shorter card, this is a really good option. This is the best dual fan card there is out there for the 4070. And I really like their new design style with the transparent plastic here. It looks really neat. I think it just makes it a bit more unique. But it does have a triple slot thickness, so if you need a dual slot card, this is not the choice. But if you just need a short card, a dual fan card, this is, well, a really good option. The best dual fan card there is. Just not for 2-slot requiring cases. It also has a really good heatsink, obviously, like I said, and also a really good VRM at 8 phases for the GPU core itself. And yeah, it does have really high quality parts as well, more than the regular reference stuff. But just be warned that there has already been reports that the custom PCB cards like the MSI Gaming X or the Asus Dual and the Asus TUF does have more coil whine than the NVIDIA reference-based PCBs like the PNY, the Palette, and the Galax, and the NVIDIA obviously, and the PNY and the Gainward and stuff. But so yeah, the custom PCB cards are just the Asus and the MSI Gaming X, and they do have a bit more coil whine according to reports. So if you want a card without coil whine, maybe avoid the Asus and just get the PNY or Palette cards. Now the Galax cards, it's kind of horrible in terms of the cooling performance for a triple fan card and a triple slot card. So I really can't put it above the Dual because it literally performs worse than the Asus Dual with only 2 fans. And the VRMs is quite good, but it's, yeah, the cooler really lets it down, even though it has an 8-phase VRM that's, well, it's just as powerful as the Asus Dual. Then the NVIDIA Founders Edition would be after that because the cooler is really small and compact, which is great for SFF builds, but it's not as good as even the Galax card, which is a terrible triple fan card. But you might say this is more efficient in terms of space to cooling performance, which it is true. It is a better designed cooler. This also has a 6-phase base level VRM because it's a reference card level, but it's really not too big of a deal. And yeah, next is the PNY 4070 dual fan card, which does still have an 8-phase VRM, so it's technically better than the NVIDIA Founders Edition card, but the PNY card has a cooler that's slightly worse than the NVIDIA Founders Edition. Now the Gainward Ghost would be the crappiest card here, aside from the Gigabyte, which I forgot to open, which has a really terrible cooler design on the Gigabyte, because as you can see again, the temperatures is barely cooler than the Founders Edition for being a card that's much bigger. And also the acoustics on the Gigabyte card, it's the same as the Founders, so the same level of noise with only slightly better temperatures, and the card being triple fan with 3 slots, it really does not make sense to me. This is stupid. Like, it's very inefficient. You should not get the Gigabyte card. This is one of the cards to avoid because this has a really cheaply designed cooler that's, you know, the heatsink is actually not that impressive for a triple fan card, especially with the direct touch heat pipe again, which I keep harping on about, that you should really not get a card with a direct touch heat pipe on a graphics card, because GPU dies don't have a heat spreader, and direct touch heat pipes leave gaps in between, which leaves hot spots and also is inconsistent between one card to another of the same design, because you can never get the heat pipes totally flat. And as you can see, the performance of the heatsink is not that great, even though the VRMs of this card is quite decent at 8 phases. it's not a great card to get. I would not get the Gigabyte Windforce. It just doesn't make sense being this big and performing that badly. It's only the only worst card out here is the Gainward Ghost or the Palette Dual that's also reviewed here, which is the same cards. It looks exactly like this. It's a dual slot, dual fan card that's extremely light, only 700 grams, and that's because the heatsink is tiny and it only has a 4 heat pipe heatsink. And yeah, the VRMs are obviously also base levels. So this is really the worst RTX 4070 in terms of the cooling performance and the VRMs. But one card that you really should avoid, like I said in the beginning of this updated V2 video, is the MSI Ventus 3X, which is really annoying to me because I really liked this card at first. I thought this was a really good performing card, and it's pretty amazing they did it in a 2-slot form factor, and it looks pretty clean to me. But again, the heatsink does not cool the VRMs at the top. There is no thermal pads. There's not even a spot made for the thermal pads. It's not like they forgot the thermal pads. They just didn't design it into the cooler. They completely just overlooked it. And it has a plastic backplate, so you can't even fix it by putting a thermal pad behind the VRMs. So these two VRM phases at the top of the card, they're just gonna cook. They literally are cooking without any cooling at all. Because you can see in the photos here, there's nothing cooling them. It's just bare on the PCB like that, on the VRM phases. And the Guru 3D reviews with the flare measurements clearly show that it reaches 96.5 degrees Celsius. I don't know how I overlooked this. I'm really sorry again. If you bought this card, you should return it or cancel your order, because it turns out it's really horrible in terms of that design. It's just a design failure. This is the card that you actually have to avoid because there is something wrong with it. It's not gonna blow up being 97 degrees Celsius. If you bought it and you can't return it, maybe run higher fan speeds. That's my recommendation. It'll run fine. It's not gonna blow up, but a component that's running 20-30 degrees hotter than the other cards usually running at, it's not great for longevity especially. The maximum temperature of the power stage might be 150 degrees according to the spec sheet, but 150 degrees is only for the MOSFETs. What about the capacitors and the chokes that's around it and stuff? It's just not great having a component run that hot. It's just, this is a design oversight, so I really would avoid the Ventus. But for the rest of the cards, it's basically the same lineup as I've shown in the video before I re-uploaded this time. But I just wanted to take down that video and use this video instead to warn people not to get the MSI Ventus. And aside of also, I guess, the Gigabyte, that's kind of horrible. It's not as bad as the Gainward Ghost, which if you need a small card, I guess it's a okay choice. But the Gigabyte is just a really crappy triple fan design that's not really efficient at all in terms of its space usage, and the fact that it has triple fans, and it's worse than the, well, it's not worse, but it's barely better than the NVIDIA FE, which is much smaller. So yeah, avoid the MSI Ventus and the Gigabyte and the Gainward unless that's the only one you can find. But the rest of the cards, yeah, they're pretty okay, and the same order as in the video before the re-upload. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video and found us useful. And if you do, please leave a like and click subscribe to see more of this kind of videos, hopefully in the future if you guys think it's useful. And also, obviously, watch out for the full buying guide with plenty of cards being compared after more reviews come out and all the biases have been uploaded and I can compare them. So a full RTX 4070 buying guide video is still coming, as well as the AMD cards that you guys have also been asking. It's just that there's more people asking for the NVIDIA cards. But anyways, yeah, again, thank you for watching.